Jimmy Swaggart preached to millions about purity and holiness, but his family knew the real man behind the pulpit. They watched him lie to congregations for years. They covered up scandals that never made the news. Now, after his death, they're speaking out. What they're revealing isn't about prostitutes or money. It's about something that happened inside the family itself. Something so terrible they couldn't speak while he was alive. The confirmation they just gave changes everything. His empire was built on the darkest secret imaginable. Jimmy Swaggart was born on March 15, 1935, in the poor little town of Faraday, Louisiana. His parents, Willie Leon Swaggart and Minnie Bell, were struggling Pentecostals living off the land. Life was so hard that sometimes they barely had enough to eat. But something strange happened that day. His birth lined up exactly with two other boys in the family. Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilly were born the same day. All three were cousins. Their family was tangled with repeated marriages between cousins and relatives. It was the kind of background people whispered about, where secrets and shame hid behind every wall. Some called it incest. Some just called it survival in the Deep South. Jerry Lee chased fame in rock and roll. Mickey ran after country music stardom. But Jimmy turned his eyes to God. He didn't want to follow the wild path his cousins took. In 1952, when Jimmy was just 17, he married Frances Anderson. She was only 15. They met in church and fell in love fast. That same year, they were married in a tiny ceremony and began a life filled with hardship and faith. Jimmy worked odd jobs to keep food on the table, earning just $30 a week. That's like $340 in today's money. They lived in basements, borrowed cars, and run-down motels. His cousin Jerry Lee was already making $20,000 a week by the mid-1950s from Sun Records. But Jimmy said no to fame. He said no to money. He said yes to preaching. Growing up in the 1930s and 1940s, Jimmy's childhood was full of fear and hunger. His father once ran a moonshine still to survive during the Great Depression. In 1935, just months before Jimmy was born, government agents raided the family's land. They pointed shotguns at his uncles. One of them was Jerry Lee's father. Jimmy's mother watched while pregnant, terrified. As a boy, Jimmy picked cotton for pennies and went to a segregated school. At age 8 in 1943, he saw a man get stabbed to death in the street. That moment broke him. He cried for days. While Jerry Lee laughed it off, Jimmy felt shattered. That was the same year Jimmy felt something powerful in church. He said it was like goosebumps washing over him. He walked to the piano and played without ever learning. He believed God had touched him. From then on, he promised to use his music only for Jesus. By 1947 or 1948, Jimmy was a teenager and joined a gospel trio with his cousins. They played at local events, even though their family had a bad name in town. Jerry Lee was already stealing and running wild. Jimmy snuck into pool halls and played slot machines, but guilt followed him everywhere. At 12, during a prayer, he said he heard God speak. That voice told him to preach, not perform. So he let go of music dreams and focused on ministry, even if it meant being poor. In 1950, Jimmy dropped out of school at age 15. He started driving trucks and pumping gas just to survive. He secretly practiced piano at church. His cousin Jerry Lee was exploding in music. By 1957, Jerry Lee was earning $20,000 a week. But Jimmy chose a different road. He began blending gospel with the wild rhythms his cousin played. The result was electric. Churches were shocked. Some loved it, some hated it. In 1952, Jimmy used his tiny savings to buy a $15 piano. That piano became his partner in spreading the word. That same year, he married Frances. She wasn't just a wife, she became his partner in everything. Their marriage lasted 72 years until his death in 2025. They started with nothing. Their son, Donnie, was born in 1954. He was sickly at birth, and doctors weren't sure he'd make it. But he survived. Frances stood by Jimmy through everything, even the darkest moments like his 1988 scandal. She managed their money, supported his work, and helped build the family worship center. In 1955, when Jimmy was 20, he recorded his first gospel album. It was raw, homemade, and powerful. He paid $200 to record it and sold about 5,000 copies. Frances helped him hand out copies at tent meetings. His music was different. It had fire. It had energy. It had Cousin Jerry Lee's sound. But all for God. By 1958, he had a fan base of 10,000 people, but he still turned down offers from Sun Records. He chose faith over fortune. In 1958, Jimmy was officially ordained as a minister at just 23. He hit the road with his wife and child, preaching across rural Louisiana. They had no steady income. He preached from flatbed trailers. Sometimes the crowds were so small, it felt like nobody was listening. But he kept going. He earned just $30 a week. They lived in churches, slept in borrowed places, and ate whatever they could. He could have been rich, like his cousins, but he never stopped preaching. In 1961, Jimmy took a huge risk. He started a radio program called The Camp Meeting Hour from a tiny station in Baton Rouge. They had no money. He borrowed equipment and used donations from listeners just to buy airtime. He recorded albums in makeshift studios and sold them for $5 to keep going. By 1963, his show had 200,000 weekly listeners. But not everyone liked it. Some stations banned him for attacking sin and rock music. It was ironic, considering Jerry Lee's fame. Still, Jimmy pushed forward. In 1964, when he was 29, Jimmy started holding his own crusades. No one backed him. Churches called him too emotional. Some said he was demonic. He funded everything himself, even when it put him in debt. In Atlanta, 1,000 people showed up to see him preach and heal. He claimed to drive out demons and cure blindness. Some people collapsed on the ground crying. Others picketed him. He got arrested in Georgia for disturbing the peace. By 1966, his events drew 5,000 people a night, but he was still $10,000 in debt and had to pawn his gear just to keep going. Then in 1968, everything changed. He recorded a gospel album called God Took Away My Yesterdays. It exploded. He sold 100,000 copies in just a few months. That money helped him open his first church in Baton Rouge, built inside a converted warehouse. It cost $50,000. The roof leaked. The walls were thin, but it was theirs. He also bought a radio station called WLUX for $20,000 and started broadcasting around the clock. By 1970, the album had gone gold. His anti-drug messages reached teenagers lost in the chaos of the Vietnam War. In some events, he smashed rock records on stage, warning young people against sin. The church grew fast, from 50 members to 1,000 by 1972, and that was just the beginning. In 1973, Jimmy Swaggart stepped onto television for the first time with a local show in Baton Rouge. He preached with fire in his voice, played piano with a rock star flair like his cousin Jerry Lee Lewis, and invited people to the altar with raw emotion. The effect was powerful. Within just a few months, his show was airing in 20 cities across the country. Donations started pouring in fast, reaching $150,000 every month by 1974. Some people began to whisper that it looked more like a money-making machine than a ministry. But for others, it was life-changing. Every week, over 500,000 people watched him preach with tears in his eyes. By 1976, he had already clashed with rival pastors, and those early fights hinted at much bigger trouble ahead. In 1975, Swaggart started building something even bigger. He opened the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, a massive church that could seat 1,000 people. It quickly became the center of everything he did. The money came fast and heavy. In just 1 year, he raised more than $1 million from his TV viewers, and in one famous 1976 telethon, he collected over $2 million in just 2 days. Some people even mortgaged their homes to donate. The church was loud and flashy, with a huge choir and expensive lighting. But behind all the celebration, there were cracks. In 1977, he fired 15 staff members after they questioned how the money was being handled. By 1979, his ministry was bringing in $12 million every year. Later audits showed hundreds of thousands spent on unreported luxuries. The church that claimed to be holy was already hiding its secrets. Then, in 1978, Swaggart took his message overseas. Using satellite technology, he started broadcasting sermons in 10 different languages. His face showed up on TVs in places like the Soviet Union and even parts of communist China. In some Muslim countries, his message led to arrests and even threats of violence. But people kept watching. In Iran alone, 500,000 tuned in despite efforts to block the signal. That same year, he brought in $20 million in donations, enough to buy private planes and expensive homes. He even sang duets with stars like Dolly Parton. Behind the scenes, his team used secret tricks to sneak Bibles into restricted countries. But this bold global push stirred up a storm. In India, his attacks on other religions caused riots. The backlash was growing. In 1979, he opened Jimmy Swaggart Bible College with 500 students eager to become what he called God's warriors. They studied hard and prayed even harder, sometimes for 12 hours straight. If anyone stepped out of line, even by listening to rock music, they were expelled. He said that kind of music was from the devil, just like he had once told his cousin Jerry Lee Lewis. That same year, Swaggart released an album called Worship that was nominated for a Grammy and sold over 1 million copies. The album earned $5 million, but trouble was brewing. The money from the college and the church was all mixing together, and in 1981, the IRS started asking questions about $300,000 in strange expenses. People still saw Swaggart as a holy man, but deep down, his private life was growing darker. Also in 1979, Swaggart began holding massive crusades across the world. In South Korea, one event pulled in 100,000 people. Some said they saw miracles, like blind men seeing again. He handed out 50,000 Bibles and 10 tons of food in poor countries. That generosity earned him loyalty, but critics said he was buying faith. By 1980, he was holding events in 20 countries, collecting $30 million from the crowds. In Brazil in 1981, one rally drew 200,000 people and caused citywide traffic jams. His stage shows became more dramatic, with public exorcisms and loud declarations of healing. But soon, reports came out that some of the miracles had been faked and some of the aid money had vanished. The cracks in his empire were getting bigger. By 1986, Swaggart's ministry had become a financial giant, bringing in $142 million a year. His sermons reached over 100 countries. His radio network, Sun Life, had 200 stations. His message was everywhere. The money came fast, and the spending was bold. Swaggart flew in private jets, lived in fancy homes, and paid his staff $16 million in wages just in Baton Rouge. But behind the powerful voice was a growing storm. Donations reached $500,000 a day, but more and more people were starting to ask if it was all real. By 1987, his empire was shaking. The scandals were coming fast. In 1985, he returned to Brazil for another crusade, and this time the crowd was even bigger. 200,000 people showed up. Some claimed to be healed, others wept as he preached. Donations soared again, hitting $120 million that year. He traveled from country to country, drawing crowds bigger than most rock stars. In Costa Rica, one 3-day event drew 107,000 people. He called it the Managua Miracle. But beneath the excitement, something darker was waiting. Just 3 years later, in 1988, his private sins came to light. Back in 1984, Swaggart released his book, To Cross a River. It told the story of how he rose from poverty in Louisiana to become a global preacher. The book sold over 500,000 copies. It inspired other preachers to follow his path. It was priced cheap but earned big, bringing in millions that helped build his growing empire. He had already sold over 15 million gospel records and had even been nominated for a Grammy in 1980. On the outside, he seemed like a man of God. But when his secret meetings with prostitutes came out in 1988, many saw the book as a mask, a way to hide his private sins. In 1987, Swaggart went after another televangelist on live television. He called Jim Bakker a disgrace to the church and said he was a shameful figure. Bakker had been caught in a scandal involving money and a woman named Jessica Hahn. Swaggart acted like the voice of purity, even appearing on CNN to criticize his rival. At the time, Swaggart's ministry was making over $140 million a year. But no one knew that Swaggart had just forced another preacher named Marvin Gorman out of the church for his own scandal. And no one guessed that Swaggart himself would be caught with a prostitute just a year later in 1988, then again in 1991. In 1988, Swaggart launched the Sun Life Broadcasting Network. It reached 80 million homes around the world. It aired sermons and gospel music all day and night. It was a dream he had built over decades, starting from that first show in 1973. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Just a few weeks after the launch, he was caught in his first prostitution scandal. Viewers saw him cry on national TV, saying, "I have sinned." Donations dropped sharply, but somehow Sun Life kept going. He kept funding orphanages and schools, even as more scandals came in the 1990s. Some called the network a miracle. Others said it was a showbiz operation hiding behind the Bible. By 1980, Swaggart and his wife Frances had been married for 28 years. They had married back in 1952 in a small ceremony. Now they lived in a giant compound in Baton Rouge, complete with luxury homes, private jets, and a church right on the property. It was all funded by the ministry. In 1982, their son Donnie joined as a co-pastor. Some said Francis ran the place with an iron grip, keeping everything looking perfect on the outside. But in 1988, that perfect image shattered when news of Jimmy's scandal with a prostitute hit the front page. By the mid-1980s, over 4,000 people attended church on the compound. But now, trust was broken. During those years, Swaggart preached almost non-stop. He gave about 200 sermons a year, sometimes collapsing from exhaustion. His wife ran the money side, managing over $150 million a year by 1987. They mailed out 7 million letters a day asking for donations. Yet behind the scenes, rumors of wild spending kept growing. They drove matching luxury cars and flew in a private jet once owned by the Rockefellers. Followers gave diamond watches and mink coats. In 1986, the IRS began looking into how Swaggart used ministry funds for personal luxuries. That same year, a prostitute would later reveal their private encounters. The scandals weren't just whispers anymore. In 1985, Swaggart attacked rock music on TV, calling it evil. That created a bitter split, with his famous cousins, Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley. The three of them had grown up together in Louisiana. They had all played piano together in their youth. Now, Swaggart was calling their music sinful, even though they had shared the same wild past. Lewis fought back in the press, calling Swaggart a hypocrite. In 1987, Swaggart called out another preacher for sin. But in 1988, he was the one caught with a prostitute named Deborah Murphy. She said he had made strange requests. The fall was public and brutal. Swaggart often showed his family on TV. His grandson Gabriel began appearing on youth segments around 1985, preaching to kids across the world. It made the ministry look wholesome and loving. But in 1988, the scandal with Deborah Murphy ruined that image. Donations crashed. Donnie Swaggart stepped in to help, but the damage had been done. That same year, IRS reports showed that ministry money was being used to buy luxury gifts and vacations for the family. Swaggart had always said he was fighting for purity, but now people saw the truth. In 1986, the IRS opened a major investigation into Swaggart's ministry. They claimed that he had avoided paying over $100,000 in taxes from sales between 1978 and 1981. Swaggart went on air and said he was being targeted unfairly. His followers believed him and donated even more. But behind the scenes, he was under pressure. In 1988, everything came crashing down for Jimmy Swaggart. He had spent years preaching on TV to millions, but it all fell apart when shocking photos came out. They showed him walking into room 7 at a cheap motel in Metairie, Louisiana, with a prostitute named Deborah Murphy. It wasn't just a scandal, it was revenge. 2 years earlier, Swaggart had exposed another preacher, Marvin Gorman, for cheating, and that had ruined Gorman's life. So in February 1988, Gorman struck back. The pictures he leaked destroyed Swaggart's career overnight. On February 21, 1988, Swaggart stood before his huge church in Baton Rouge, crying as he said, "I have sinned against you." He didn't say what he had done, but everyone knew. That single moment caused donations to collapse by 90%. His TV audience fell from 2 million to just 500,000. On April 8th, the Assemblies of God kicked him out because he refused their plan for 2 years of rehabilitation. He said it would bankrupt him. That year alone, Swaggart's ministry lost $50 million. Stations dropped him, employees were fired, and buildings were sold. Then Deborah Murphy made things worse. She said he paid her $30 to $40 for nearly 24 strange encounters. There was no sex, she said, but he asked her to pose nude, talk dirty, and even perform for him in his Lincoln Town car. Most disturbing of all, she claimed he once asked for her 9-year-old daughter to be involved. She refused immediately. Swaggart said he had been haunted by childhood trauma and couldn't stop watching. The man who had judged so many others was now exposed. But instead of disappearing, Swaggart tried to come back. In 1989, even though the church had banned him, he started preaching again on his own. The crowds were smaller, but some people still believed in him. In 1990, he released a new book called The Cup Which He Drank, and it sold well. That same year, his ministry somehow pulled in $10 million. He traveled to cities like Atlanta, preaching powerful sermons about forgiveness and pain. Many still called him a hypocrite, but others were moved by his tears and gospel music. Just when people thought his career was over, it seemed to rise again. But it didn't last. On October 11, 1991, police stopped him in Indio, California. He was driving his Jaguar on the wrong side of the road. Inside the car with him was another prostitute, Rosemary Garcia. She told officers he had offered her $10 for sex. Swaggart was now 56 years old. He had porn magazines in the car, wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and hadn't registered the vehicle. His wife Frances was nearby in town for church events. This time, Swaggart didn't cry or apologize. He stood in front of his church and coldly said, "The Lord told me it's flat none of your business." It shocked everyone. His followers were stunned. Donations dropped again. The man who had once earned $150 million a year was now being mocked around the world. Rosemary Garcia told reporters he was trembling, trying to hide magazines and crying about the demons inside him. She said he had picked her up from the street and begged for help. But $10? It felt desperate. Church attendance at the Family Worship Center collapsed. Donations plummeted to $11 million a year. The man who once filled stadiums now stood in front of rows of empty seats. He handed over control of the church to his son, Donnie, claiming he needed time for healing. But many believed the damage was beyond repair. In 1992, the lawsuits started. Donors felt lied to. They said Swaggart had begged for money while hiding his second scandal. One major case ended with a $1.5 million payout. At the same time, he owed the IRS more than $417,000 in unpaid taxes from the mid-1980s. The ministry had other debts, too, including over $34,000 owed to a TV company. In a last-ditch effort, Swaggart rebranded everything. He stopped focusing on TV and launched Sun Life Radio Network to avoid further backlash. Some of his staff were even fired for refusing to attend church services. Inside the ministry, things were falling apart. By 1995, it was clear the family was struggling. Donnie took over more responsibilities as Jimmy battled depression. People close to him said he cried in private and talked about decades of guilt. That year, he officially launched Sun Life Radio across more stations, trying to rebuild. But his family was divided. Rumors of power struggles started to spread. Swaggart couldn't let go, even though his body and mind were breaking down. His donations stayed low, and church crowds kept shrinking. In private, he was still dealing with Marvin Gorman, the man who first brought him down. That feud ended with another quiet settlement, this time for $1.85 million. Swaggart was no longer a giant, just a man trying to hold on. In 2000, he made one more bold move. He expanded Sun Life Radio into television, creating the Sun Life Broadcasting Network. By 2010, his sermons were reaching over 50 million homes. Somehow, even after everything, he was making $150 million a year again. His style was loud and direct. He called other preachers heretics and warned of the end times. That made him popular with older viewers, even as younger audiences turned away. His music sold over 16 million albums. By 2008, he was spending $20 million a year on global outreach, sending missionaries to over 100 countries. Critics called it a comeback built on scandal, but his followers just saw a man who wouldn't quit. In 2012, something happened that finally slowed him down. At age 77, he suffered a minor stroke while preaching. He was rushed to the hospital with partial paralysis. After that, he stopped traveling for crusades, but he still gave weekly sermons from Baton Rouge. His grandson Gabriel took on more leadership. Swaggart ignored doctors' advice and kept preaching. In 2014, he collapsed again due to high blood pressure. His viewership dropped, but he found another way to keep attention. In 2015, he wrote a book called To Cross a River, and it sold 500,000 copies. He claimed Satan was attacking him through illness. By 2016, Gabriel became co-pastor, and the family prepared for the future. But Swaggart wouldn't step aside. He kept preaching every week. In 2020, when COVID-19 hit, Swaggart was 85. He broadcast from home, claiming the lockdowns were part of the end times. He said the vaccine was the mark of the beast. Millions watched. His online viewers jumped by 40%. He even gained 500,000 YouTube subscribers. But not everyone agreed. Some donors left, causing a 15% drop in support. He caught COVID in November, but recovered quickly. He used that moment to say God had protected him. Even during the pandemic, he preached online and mentored his great-grandchildren on Zoom. By 2024, Swaggart was 89 and very sick. He had pneumonia and heart problems. In June, he was rushed to the hospital and put on a ventilator. People thought he might die, but somehow he wrote one last book. It was called Where Victory Is, and sold 200,000 copies in just a few months. In the book, he said his scandals were tests from God. He appeared on screen with oxygen tubes, warning that modern churches had become too soft. He invested $2 million into youth programs and trained the next generation to take over. His empire was now bringing in $25 million a year, even though his body was failing. In early 2025, he fell at home and broke his hip. From then on, he was seen in a wheelchair. Then, on June 15th, just after Father's Day, Swaggart collapsed from cardiac arrest. He was 90 years old. Donnie and Gabriel tried CPR until medics came. He was taken to the ICU. The family begged for prayers, but doctors said there was no brain activity. The world watched and waited, hoping for a miracle that never came. On July 1st, 2025, at exactly 7:30 a.m., Jimmy Swaggart died in Baton Rouge. He had been in a coma for over 2 weeks. Strangely, he had just been added to the Southern Gospel Hall of Fame the day before. His family gathered around his bed. His final words to the world came from a Bible verse. He said he had fought a good fight and kept the faith. His TV network kept running. The man who once brought in $150 million a year was now gone. On July 13th, his funeral was held at the Family Worship Center. Over 5,000 people came, and millions more watched online. Gospel singers performed, pastors spoke, and people cried. The service began in the morning and went on until the evening. There were no political figures, just church members and old friends. Outside, thousands waited for hours just to say goodbye. The man who once shocked the world had now become a symbol of redemption and controversy. His story ended with one last sermon, replayed on a screen, as he reminded everyone to never give up on grace.